Join our community by subscribing. Every click helps us share more stories like this one. The introduction. In the small town of Millwood, where life often unfolded like the gentle turn of pages in a forgotten book, a cloud of unease had begun to gather. With a population barely breaking the 3,000 mark, the residents prided themselves on knowing one another, their lives interwoven like the fibers of a well-worn fabric. However, this tight-knit community was not prepared for the storm that was about to tear through their idyllic existence. It began on a crisp autumn morning. As the leaves turned from green to brilliant hues of amber and maroon, the local newspaper's headlines would soon bear news that would eclipse even the sunniest of days. The sun had risen as it always did, lazily spilling light onto the familiar streets. But below the surface, hidden fears simmered. It was the sudden disappearance of Claire Bennett, a beloved schoolteacher known for her infectious laughter and dedication to educating the town's children. While her absence may have seemed temporary at first, as hours turned into days, concern spread like wildfire. Her colleagues at Millwood Elementary noticed her desk untouched, a stack of ungraded assignments looming large, and the vibrant classroom devoid of its guiding spirit. Friends who would typically hear her warm voice via text or phone calls found their worries crescendoing into panic. Where could Claire have gone? And why had no one seen her? As neighbors gathered on porches, exchanging whispered theories over steaming cups of coffee, the sun descended into crimson shades. Shadows grew longer, and the phone lines buzzed with whispers of a search party being organized. In Millwood, the conversation seemed to hang in the air. Something was terribly wrong. And the truth, lurking just beyond the town's pristine borders, was about to reveal itself. The victim, Claire Bennett, was an embodiment of the town's heartbeat, her radiance casting warmth over its residents. The daughter of a local mechanic and a librarian, she had roots so firmly planted in Millwood that her absence felt like a missing thread in the community's fabric. At 32, Claire was not just a teacher. She was a mentor, a confidante, and a friend. Her laughter echoed through hallways, igniting joy in the hearts of children and adults alike. Describing her was an exercise in superlatives. The best artichoke dip maker, the most enthusiastic triathlete, and the go-to person for any spontaneous group challenge, whether it was a bake sale or a school play. Her genuine interest in each student fostered a love for learning. That Friday morning, the sun had risen in a cloudless sky, illuminating her journey to school. But it would soon mark the day when her life fractured by twisting dark alleys of fate. Reflecting on Claire's tightly woven life, her friends recalled moments' notions of missed calls and unanswered texts. Angela, a fellow teacher, felt an ache in her chest as she remembered their last conversation. Claire had spoken enthusiastically about plans for the fall festival and the pumpkin-themed crafts she had lined up for her students. There was an insidious normalcy to that day. She seemed her vibrant self. As the hours stretched into a long, harrowing night, Claire's absence transformed from an unsettling mystery to a burden too heavy to ignore. Police were alerted, and as they canvassed the town, familiar faces cast nervous glances at one another. Everyone bore the weight of unknowns, and Claire was no longer just a beloved teacher. She had become a symbol of fear every parent's nightmare made real. Her laughter echoed in the memories of those who loved her, a haunting melody now tinged with dread. The crime scene. The following morning, a low mist hung over Millwood as the first rays of light sliced through the fog. signaling the start of an investigation set against a backdrop of sheer desperation. The police arrived at Claire's modest, sun-yellow home, a place where warmth and laughter once permeated every corner. Yet today, the atmosphere felt heavy, suffocating. A sense of loss crept into the homes of her neighbors as they gathered outside, their faces a tapestry of worry and sorrow. Within the confines of her living room, adorned with vibrant children's artwork and overflowing bookshelves, the quietude was unnerving. Detective Sarah Collins, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for her meticulous nature, arrived on the scene. As she stepped through the threshold, she immediately sensed the weight of the moment. Claire's belongings lay untouched, remnants of her last day lingering like ghosts. Her handbag rested by the front door, a familiar sight that now struck an eerie chord. As the detectives fanned out, one particularly striking piece of evidence caught Sarah's eye. Claire's cell phone, lying on the kitchen table, screen still illuminated. Alerts blinked. Messages left unanswered. The volume of life that had once thrummed through this home had ceased abruptly. Sarah's mind churned with questions. Had Claire left in a hurry, or was her departure something more sinister? A search of the backyard revealed further unsettling details. A shovel, half buried and out of place, piqued the detectives' curiosity. As they unearthed it, Sarah's instincts flared. Why was it discarded here, so far from the garden's neat edges? The whispers of the community echoed in her mind, the rumors of a new neighbor moving in just weeks prior. The backyard conversations that turned cold. The fleeting glimpses shared between strangers. As the sun climbed higher, revealing the broad spectrum of the crime scene, it became evident that the search for Claire would lead them down paths of more than just physical evidence. It would unearth the town's buried secrets, familial ties, shifting loyalties, and perhaps the true face of fear. The early investigation. Days passed in a blur for the residents of Millwood, each tick of the clock amplifying the gnawing uncertainty that had gripped the community. Detective Sarah Collins and her partner, Officer Mark Lawson, stood against the backdrop of the police station, poring over the evidence they had gathered. On the cluttered table before them, a large board displayed Claire's photo surrounded by notes, potential leads, and a web of connections. The duo embarked on interviewing those who had known Claire best. As they moved from the school to the local cafe and beyond, it became clear that Claire's life was a tapestry interwoven with diverse characters. Angela, Claire's closest friend, recounted their bond with a mixture of admiration and sorrow. She had this innate sense of people. Claire could see right through facades. I never thought she could be in danger. Tears pooled in her eyes, betraying the resolve she tried to maintain. Next, they questioned the new neighbor, Thomas Beckett, a quiet man in his late 30s, who had moved in just a month prior. His responses were measured. "I hardly knew Claire," he mumbled, crossing his arms defensive. "I saw her a couple of times, but we never spoke." What happened? But Sarah sensed something lingering just beneath the surface. An unease in the man's gaze that hinted at untold stories. Back at the station, they scrutinized Claire's social media presence. Everything from everyday musings to intimate snapshots breathed life into the woman they were desperately trying to find. But it was her interactions with a mysterious online figure someone named JD, whose name surfaced repeatedly in comments that piqued their interest. The investigation unfurled slowly, each newfound detail ambushing them with more questions than answers. As they gathered information, tension built with every encounter. Each resident who crossed the station threshold unwittingly transformed from a friendly neighbor to a potential suspect, and the reality settled in. The darkness within Millwood, once barely perceptible, was becoming painfully visible. The investigation promised to strip back the smiles of the quaint town, revealing the stark shadows that had long lingered beneath the surface. The dead ends. As the investigation deepened into its second week, a pervasive sense of frustration settled over Sarah and Mark. Each lead seemed to circle back on itself, unraveling thread by thread, leading them into the underbelly of Millwood without revealing any clear path forward. The case was quickly growing cold, the urgency of Claire's disappearance overshadowed by the complex web of a community that seemed to guard its secrets tightly. They followed the digital trail of JD, the enigmatic online persona who had recently interacted with Claire. After numerous efforts to track him down, they discovered that he was just another shadow profile filled with carefully curated images and vague posts. No real name, no way to make contact. It's like chasing smoke, Mark said, frustration leaking into his voice as he slammed the laptop shut. With each day that passed, Claire receded further into the backdrop of their lives, a haunting reminder of what was at stake. Suspicions had begun to shift, too. The detectives conducted thorough interviews with not only acquaintances but also family members. Claire's father, Daniel, a stoic man with an unwavering demeanor, appeared unyielding but struck them as oddly detached. His answers were methodical, almost rehearsed. She was happy. "I can't imagine anyone wanting to harm her," he repeatedly stated, as if trying to convince himself just as much as the detectives. During the investigation, they learned of a charity event Claire had organized a few weeks prior, where she had encountered several familiar faces and made new acquaintances. Yet, any sense of breakthrough remained elusive. Witnesses contradicted one another, and the alibis of key individuals failed to match up. Friends who claimed to be nowhere near her home suddenly found themselves changing their stories. As the walls felt like they were closing in, Sarah sensed that they were dealing with a cunning puzzle, each piece obscured by deception. The hostility swirling among residents grew palpable. Whispers turned into accusation. It wasn't merely a case of finding a missing teacher. It was a transformation of trust into suspicion. With each dead end, the question loomed larger. People in Millwood, and they were letting on. And if so, what lengths would they go to keep it hidden? A break in the case. It was a damp Tuesday morning when a flicker of hope surfaced through the murky waters of despair gripping Millwood. Sarah, engrossed in her notes at the precinct, was jolted from her thoughts by the shrill ring of the landline. Often, the sound carried with it nothing more than idle chatter or frustrations regarding the investigation. But this time, it was different. "Detective Collins, this is Jack from the County Dispatch," the voice on the line announced. "We received an anonymous tip about Claire Bennett's whereabouts. A woman claiming to have seen something unusual last week." Heart racing, Sarah hurriedly jotted down the details, fueled by a surge of adrenaline. The anonymity of the tipper implied possible fear, but it also suggested a line to potential discovery. Meeting Mark at the respective address at Rundown Motel, located at the outskirts of town, felt like stepping into another world, one peppered with neon lights and shadows. When they arrived, the atmosphere was bleak, the air thick with unease as they entered room 12. A woman wearing a worn cardigan greeted them, her hands trembling slightly as she gestured them inside. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice strained, revealing a blend of anxiety and determination. "I didn't want to get involved, but I can't stay quiet any longer." As they settled in, she recounted her story. The night Claire disappeared, she had been staying in the motel and noticed a car parked on the Phrygian, unfamiliar sedan with tinted windows. "I heard shouting and then a loud crash. I didn't think much of it at the time, but then I saw a man pulling something into his trunk. I think it was her bag." Sarah glanced at Mark, both detectives exchanging urgent looks. The thought of Claire's belongings being handled by an unknown figure cast a new pall over the investigation. "Did you catch a glimpse of the man?" Mark inquired, leaning forward. The woman hesitated, shaking her head. "It had a distinct blue bumper sticker. That's all I remember, I swear." With renewed resolve, Sarah took notes furiously, fueled by the notion that they might finally be chasing a lead. As they exited the motel, a shared weight lifted slightly off their shoulders, a breath of fleeting hope, bolstered by the sight of fresh evidence. But just as the air felt lighter, Sarah sensed the impending crux of the investigation. The threat of what lurked beneath the surface of Millwood was becoming dangerously palpable. The suspect. The tale from the motel weighed heavily on Sarah and Mark as they drove back to the precinct. With the blue bumper sticker now etched in their minds, they began to draw connections in the dark web of Claire's life. The bustling town of Millwood seemed deceptively small. Every detail seemed magnified, every resident now a possible player in this grim narrative. After a rush of late-night research, they learned that a blue sedan had been reported periodically at the edges of town often. Their investigation honed in on Nate Carson, a local handyman who had encountered his fair share of trouble with the law. Once known for petty thefts and altercations, he had recently cleaned up his act, or so the townspeople believed. His inexplicable presence during odd hours piqued the detective's interest. The following morning, Sarah and Mark pulled up in front of Nate's modest home. A sagging fence and overgrown grass hinted at neglect. As they approached the front door, Nate opened it slowly, his expression unreadable. Detectives he greeted warily, folding his arms defensively. "Mind if we ask you a few questions about Claire Bennett?" Sarah probed, gouging his reaction. Nate shifted uncomfortably, a flicker of anxiety twinkling in his eyes. "She was nice, but no, I haven't seen her." His voice faltered, an eyebrow twitching almost imperceptibly. As they pressed him on the timeline surrounding Claire's disappearance, the tension in the room thickened. Nate recoiled when they mentioned the blue bumper sticker. "Don't know anything about that," he denied. But Sarah could sense the latent tension brewing beneath his stoic facade. "Is it common for you to park your car at the bars?" Mark asked, his tone steady, matching the steady heartbeat building within the air. Nate hesitated, his cool demeanor slipping. "People park anywhere. I was out having drinks," he replied dismissively. Yet, The subtle crack in his poise told a different story. While they searched for solid evidence that could tie him to Claire's case, the detectives were left reeling with the growing sense that Nate was at the center of their inquiry. His lifestyle, previous brushes with the law, and increasingly erratic behavior raised the question. Could he really be the man behind Claire's unsettling disappearance? The atmosphere in Millwood felt charged as they withdrew, armed not just with questions, but a burgeoning theory that was about to thicken this mystery with dark undertones. The trial, months slipped by, filled with relentless investigation, heartbreak, and a community caught in the throes of anguish. Millwood had transformed. Once the close-knit town with cheerful greetings, it now bore heavy shadows filled with whispers and speculation. The sun-drenched days had surrendered to a siege of anxiety, as all eyes remained glued to the courtroom where the trial of Nate Carson was unfolding. The air was thick with the collective breath of residents seeking resolution, eager for justice to reclaim their quiet lives. In stark contrast to the cozy cafes and sunflower-laden streets, the courtroom held an unbearable weight. Families filled the benches, eyes haunted by the specter of Claire Bennett. The prosecution deftly laid out their case, weaving together a narrative that painted Nate not just as a suspect, but as a man fighting against the shadows of his past. Witnesses testified, detailing eerie interactions and citing Nate's late-night presence in and around Millwood. A neighbor relayed how she had seen Nate's blue sedan parked outside Claire's home on the night of her disappearance. Another account described erratic behavior during his time at the bar, raising skepticism about his reformed character. As the trial progressed, the defense painted its own picture, attempting to resurrect Nate's reputation. You can't judge a man solely by his past, his attorney argued. He has made poor decisions, but is simply a victim of accusation. As Nate sat at the defendant's table, his countenance seemed a blend of fear and defiance, a stark reminder that the courtroom was a stage where truth and fiction often collided harshly. In a powerful emotional moment, Claire's father mounted the stand, the room silent as he spoke of his daughter's passion and love for life, painting her legacy against the backdrop of heartache. She was more than a statistic, he asserted, voice choked with despair and conviction. She was a beacon of light in this community. As the days wore on, it became increasingly evident that the jury's decision would not hinge solely on concrete evidence, but also on the emotional currents that swirled through Millwood. The dichotomy of hope and hopelessness reigned, culminating in closing arguments that were both passionate and somber, culminating in a tense silence as the jury was sent to deliberate. Anxiously, the townspeople awaited the words that would shape the fate of both a man and the memory of Claire Bennett. The courtroom doors loomed ahead, silent sentinels watching over a community desperate for answers and the promise of a semblance of justice. The reminiscence of laughter intertwined with grief lingered in the air, a haunting reminder that the price of truth often comes steep, even in the name of justice. The aftermath. The wooden gavel echoed like thunder through the solemn courtroom, a finality that resonated far beyond its walls. Nate Carson was found guilty of kidnapping and manslaughter in the disappearance of Claire Bennett. As the verdict sank into the hearts of those present, a wave of emotions cascaded through the room: relief, anger, sorrow. Claire's family clutched one another, tears mingling with quiet sighs. While they had gained justice, they also bore the weight of irrevocable loss. Outside the courthouse, the media thronged like a stormy sea, eager to capture every detail every breath of reaction from the town. Millwood's main street, which once thrived with charm, pulsed now with fleeting lights and pens poised to capture the saga of its beloved teacher, a narrative steeped in sorrow and betrayal. In the following weeks, the trials of the courtroom built to a crescendo in the community. Conversations turned toward healing, but the fissures of fear and distrust lingered. Neighbors who had once shared cups of coffee now hesitated to greet one another, the shadow of suspicion looming ever larger. Those who had been so eager to help, to look past their own doors and into the lives of others, now found themselves retreating inward, reluctant to interact even under the warmth of a summer sun. Detective Sarah Collins had hoped for closure, yet the darkest corners of Millwood were far from illuminated. In her quiet moments, she counted the repercussions of the case that had stained the fabric of their town. Claire's absence was palpable. The disruption felt like a missing heartbeat. The children at Millwood Elementary carried a newfound weight, their laughter intermingled with trepidation, a reminder that the safety they once took for granted had been irreversibly altered. One evening, Sarah walked the familiar paths that Claire often traversed. The trees still whispered stories of carefree days. Joggers' footsteps echoed through the serenity. However, every glance at the school brought her back to haunting memories of bright colors turned gloomy. She paused at the entrance, scanning the playground where children chased after each other. There, she envisioned Claire, cheering them on, vibrant and alive. As autumn crept back into Millwood, the seasons would change, time would march on. Yet the legacy of Claire would remain forever entwined with its people. A bittersweet reminder of the fragility of life. For Detective Collins, the case had shifted something profound inside her, an understanding that the pursuit of justice often unraveled the threads of community, leaving spaces that could not be easily repaired. But on that quiet street, amidst the trees and the echoes of childhood laughter, she promised to remain vigilant. Claire's story, after all, was not merely about loss, it was also about survival, resilience, and the enduring hope that, despite darkness, a flicker of light could still shine through. Reflection. In the months following the trial, Millwood began to craft a new narrative. The emotional kaleidoscope of grief and healing evolved as the community grappled with a past fraught with suffering. At the center of this transformation was a collective understanding that while they could never erase the pain of losing Claire Bennett, they could honor her memory by nurturing a safer, more connected town. Detective Sarah Collins often found herself reflecting on her journey through Claire's case in the quiet moments of her life. She attended vigils held in Claire's honor, where candles flickered against the dusky sky, uniting hearts in a myriad of unspoken emotions. The gatherings were a testament to resilience, serving as a healing balm for a community that so desperately needed closure. In her solitary moments, Sarah revisited the lessons learned about trust, compassion, and the fragility of life. While justice had been served, it didn't unearth the scars engraved in Millwood's collective consciousness. Claire's laughter and spirit became almost tangible in those moments, guiding Sarah in her role as an investigator and as a member of this community. As time wore on, the detectives crafted programs to foster engagement and raise awareness about safety, instilling the wisdom cultivated from loss and transforming it into proactive measures that would protect future generations. Year after year, the candlelight vigils continued, reaffirming the notion that despite the darkness they faced, love could indeed prevail, and hope could blossom where despair had taken root. Claire's legacy became an anchor for educators, parents, and children, the vibrant ethos of a dedicated teacher, immortalized through stories, art, and education, ensuring that her light would shine brightly for years to come. And for Sarah, the ongoing journey was not just about solving crimes. It was about embracing community, resilience, and the redemptive power of connection forged through shared tragedy.